Hey everyone, welcome back to K-Korner, the channel where we dive into the wild world of entitled people and their unbelievable stories. Hope you enjoy it, and without further ado, let's go. The Mow the Lawn post reminded me of a story from my 20s. When my parents retired, they moved a few thousand kilometers away. The sale of their house went well, and the final walkthrough was supposed to be at 4 p.m. on the agreed day. This was about 30 years ago in the early 90s, so some things are a little vague. Growing up in the suburbs, we never locked our doors. In the days before the walkthrough, I helped my parents pack a few things, but the movers did most of the packing the day before. The only things left unpacked were my parents' bed, a couple of suitcases, and some essentials for their drive to their new place. At 8 a.m. on the occupancy day, the buyer walks into my parents' home while they're getting ready to leave. My mother was in the shower, and my dad was eating breakfast. Dad: "What the heck are you doing here?" Buyer: "Oh, just checking out the house." Dad: "You're not supposed to be here until 4 p.m. Get out now or I'll make you regret it." Dad, a big guy, confronted the buyer and said he'd beat him up if he didn't leave right then. The realtor was absolutely no help. Naturally, my parents freaked out and called me a bit later. "Mom, honey, the buyer just walked in on us. Your father nearly had to throw him out." Dad: "Can you believe this guy? He just waltzed in like he owned the place." So I did what any 22-year-old with a sense of vengeance would do. I decided to make the buyer's life a bit difficult. First, I removed every light fixture and left them on the living room floor. I took out every light bulb and scattered them around the house, even placing a couple in the heat vents. Next, I removed every switch plate and left them in the kitchen sink. The little screws were sprinkled around the house. I peeled off every sticker on the electrical breaker panel so you couldn't read which breaker fed which room. I took the TV antenna rotor, the thing that turned the TV antenna on the roof to tune in different stations, since it wasn't in the sale contract. I removed the dishwasher, turned off the water to it, and put it back in place. I removed all the doorknobs and tossed them into the crawlspace. When my parents called me later that morning, they were still shaken. "Mom, we don't know what to do. That man just barged in here like it was already his house." Dad: "I'm telling you, we should call the police. This is breaking and entering." Me: "Don't worry, I'll take care of it." I drove over to my parents' house, my mind racing with ideas. When I arrived, I started dismantling everything. Dad: "What are you doing?" Me: "Just a little payback. If he thinks he owns the place already, let's make it less comfortable for him." As I worked, I could see my parents relaxing a bit. They found it amusing and appreciated the support. By the time I was done, the house was a mess of disconnected fixtures, missing doorknobs, and scattered screws. The buyer tried to back out of the deal when he saw what I had done, but my dad was ready. Dad: "Go ahead, back out. I'll call the police about you breaking and entering this morning, and technically nothing has been damaged or removed. Good luck with that." The buyer's face went pale. He knew he was caught and didn't have a leg to stand on. He reluctantly agreed to go through with the purchase. At 4 p.m. as scheduled, my parents got the check from the notary. Buyer: "You think you're clever, don't you?" Me: "Just making sure you get the full experience of moving in." The notary handed my parents the check, and we left without saying another word. The buyer was fuming, but there was nothing he could do. As we drove away, my mom sighed with relief. "Mom, I'm so glad this is over. I couldn't stand another minute of that man." Dad: "We did the right thing. Now we can move on without any regrets." Me: "And he'll think twice before pulling something like that again." We laughed and joked about the situation on the drive to their new home. It was a satisfying end to a stressful day, and I felt proud for standing up for my parents. We didn't have to worry about the buyer anymore, and my parents could finally enjoy their retirement in peace. This happened about 4 years ago, but I recently found out how part of my revenge plan panned out, which is what prompted me to post this. I have never shared this with anyone before. Background: my mom has been best friends with Eileen, not her real name, since they were both kids, and Eileen has kind of been like an aunt to me. About 5 years ago, Eileen's husband of more than 25 years surprised her by asking for a divorce. Eileen lived about 6 hours away from my mom at the time, and I lived out of state, so I didn't find out how everything went down until a few months after their divorce was finalized. Unfortunately, Eileen's life kind of spiraled out of control after the separation and divorce. She developed depression and a drinking problem. But my mom and some other childhood friends were able to convince her to move back to her hometown, and then they convinced her to go to rehab. I moved back home shortly before Eileen went to rehab, and because my school and work schedule was pretty flexible, I was able to house sit and take care of some stuff while she was in rehab. The first time I visited her in rehab, I got the whole divorce story, and it was bad. Eileen's ex, Jeff, also not his real name, hadn't talked to Eileen about any problems prior to asking for a divorce, so she just assumed he fell out of love with her. But I was immediately skeptical about the things Eileen told me. First, Jeff, who was an executive at a pharmaceutical company earning mid-six figures, was fired from his job a year before they split up and decided to take a break before looking for another job. It was weird to me that Jeff decided to take a break from work because he'd always been such a workaholic. Eileen hasn't worked in years because of a disability, but she has some property and a trust her parents left her that lets her live a comfortable life without working. Jeff and Eileen lived off money from the trust while he was unemployed. Then, after Jeff said he wanted a divorce, he refused to go to couples therapy or talk about why he wanted the divorce. The only thing he would say was that they had grown apart and that he was sick of being with a woman like Eileen. He said Eileen's mother was right about her. Eileen's mother was a classic narcissist, and she bullied Eileen horribly about her attractiveness, weight, intelligence, etc., which caused a lot of psychological problems that Jeff knows about. Finally, right after the divorce was finalized, Jeff moved out of state, but to a state he didn't have any family or connections in. Jeff's parents are still alive and in their 80s and 90s, and Jeff is pretty close to them, so it didn't make any sense to me why Jeff wouldn't move to be closer to them if he wanted to move after the divorce. I didn't say anything to Eileen because I didn't want to upset her, but I thought Jeff might have been having an affair, had orchestrated his unemployment to avoid paying alimony, and then moved out of state to be with his mistress. I just didn't have a way to confirm it at the time. The investigation. Then Eileen asked me to look for a box of Jeff's stuff he had asked her to hold for him until he moved into his new apartment. She told me all the info on the box, contents, and his new address was in an email he sent her, and she gave me the password to her computer so I could access the email. This is where I lucked out. It turns out Jeff had used her computer and set up his email on the computer. I accidentally clicked on the app for his email when I was searching for Eileen's email. I decided to take a peek at his email. The first thing I noticed was that he had mostly stopped using that email address 3 years before, which was about 1 year before he was fired. In a folder for digital receipts, I found a confirmation email for a dating site, which I think he saved there accidentally. I also found a verification email for a new email address. I started to put together a speculative timeline of what happened. I guessed that about 3 years before, Jeff started an affair, and shortly after, he decided to get a new email address to help keep the affair secret. I wanted to access his dating profile to get more information, so I tried to use the forgot password feature to see if I could generate an email that would allow me to reset the password and log in that way. Unfortunately, the dating site didn't recognize Jeff's old email address. I thought I might be able to get into Jeff's new email using his old email to reset the password, and then maybe I could use the new email to get into the dating website. But I didn't want to risk locking Jeff out of his new email and alerting him until I knew more about what he'd done. And here's where I totally lucked out. The email app Jeff downloaded to Eileen's MacBook had a note feature, and super genius Jeff saved some passwords on notes. Most of the passwords weren't helpful, but I did get the password to the dating site and his Twitter and Netflix accounts. I logged into the dating site using his new email address and password. I was able to read messages Jeff sent to another woman before he broke up with Eileen. The new mistress sent Jeff her email address in one of the messages. I searched Facebook for the mistress's email address and found her profile. I couldn't read the mistress's posts, but she left her photos public. She had recent photos of her and Jeff, so I knew they were still together. She also posted a photo of a construction crew breaking ground on a new home for her and Jeff, which was interesting because I got the impression from Eileen that Jeff didn't have a lot of money after the divorce. Here's where my background is important. At the time, I was attending law school. I moved back to my hometown for one semester for a legal residency, and I had access to Lexis database, specifically their public records database. I had spent a good portion of one of my summer internships tracking down property records and other assets to help recover judgments for clients, so I knew how to search for public records. The mistress had purchased several acres in a wealthy suburb several months before Jeff filed for divorce, and there was no mortgage listed on the record. I'd already found the mistress's LinkedIn page, so I knew she worked as an executive assistant before she moved out of state with Jeff. She didn't advertise her salary, but I doubted she could have afforded the property with her salary alone. It's possible she had money outside her salary, but I suspected Jeff gave her money to purchase the land before he filed for divorce. I also found an updated record in Lexis showing Jeff and the mistress as joint owners of the property. I called the county recorder's office to confirm ownership of the property, dates, etc. The mistress had filed a quitclaim just 5 weeks after Jeff's divorce was finalized. I was still hesitant to try to log into Jeff's new email, so I decided to check his old email again to see if there was anything else I should investigate before moving to the new email. I didn't find anything, but I noticed that several passwords in his notes were the same. I decided to try to log into his new email using the same password he used for the dating site. I figured the two accounts were created around the same time, so if he had recycled a password, that was the most likely candidate. It worked. His new email was a gold mine. Because this story is already getting ridiculously long, I'll list some of the relevant stuff I found. Jeff hadn't been fired from his old job. He quit and lied to Eileen. I found an email from his admin asking where to have payroll send his last check and details about a goodbye party for him. Some emails between Jeff and a boat repair person mentioning a leak somewhere on one side of the sailboat near the engine compartment. The repair guy couldn't find the source of the leak, but he talked about current and future problems with mold and the engine on that side. Emails between Jeff and a boat broker, which included the email address of buyers farther down in the string. An emailed report from the boat inspector which didn't include the leak or any mold damage or potential damage to the engine. Emails between Jeff and his contractor about changes made to the new house's sunroom. Something about a 3-season sunroom versus a 4-season sunroom, and the construction needing to be modified to deal with the weight of snow. Emails between Jeff and the mistress. They were married. The mistress and Jeff shared a calendar. Some flirty emails between Jeff and another woman. Emails with info on Jeff's new employer. I downloaded all the important emails and their attachments and started thinking about a revenge plan. Revenge. To my mind, everything was fair game. He lied about being fired, so I wanted him fired from his new job. I suspected he hid his money before his separation from Eileen to help pay for his new house. So I wanted him to lose his house. He cheated, so I wanted to destroy his new relationship. Anything I could do about the boat was a bonus. The easiest place to start was the boat. I had no idea if the source of the leak was found and repaired, or if the leak was verbally disclosed to the buyer, but I figured Jeff was a lying jerk, so odds were fair he hid the info from the new buyer. I sent the emails between Jeff and the repairman and another copy of the inspection to the buyer. I searched Jeff's county court website 5 to 6 months later and found out the buyers filed a suit against Jeff and the broker and inspector. I couldn't figure out how to take or destroy Jeff's house, so I settled for contacting the county inspector's office to complain about the sunroom not being up to code. This is actually what prompted me to write this post because I just found out some details about what happened with the county inspectors. Keep in mind, I heard about this from a third party years after the fact, so I don't know all the details. It turns out the sunroom was code compliant, but the inspector did find a workroom attached to the detached garage that wasn't on the original permit or plans. The workshop had a bathroom that the contractor attached to the property's septic system after the initial inspection. A mutual friend of Eileen and Jeff told Eileen and me, and he guessed this was a big deal because the size of the septic system they installed wasn't sized to handle the additional input, but I don't know for sure. Jeff had to pay a fine and the workshop had to be removed. This ended up causing construction delays, which will become relevant below. As for destroying Jeff's marriage, my first impulse was to send the new wife the flirty emails between Jeff and the other woman, but when I searched for that woman on social media, I couldn't find anything. I had no way of knowing if the new wife knew the other woman and would think that the emails weren't important or evidence of an affair. Then, I played around with the idea of updating Jeff's dating profile and sending stuff to his wife, but it would take too long to manufacture a fake relationship with real dates and times, and I was worried that Jeff might get an email alert from the dating site that would clue him in. I ended up just risking that the new wife wouldn't know the other woman. I pretended to be someone concerned about an affair between Jeff and the new woman. Overall, I kept the accusation vague, but I did say Jeff and the new girl went out to eat and to the movies on a few dates. Jeff's shared calendar said the new wife was out of town. I couldn't come up with a way to get Jeff fired. I rechecked his email and calendar over several weeks looking for something I could use to get him fired. Eventually, my legal residency got too busy to devote much time to revenge, so I decided to just let it go. Eileen recently reconnected with a friend she shared with Jeff, and that friend gave Eileen an update on Jeff. Eileen shared the details with me, and that's what reminded me of what I did and prompted this story. It turned out that I didn't need to worry about sabotaging Jeff's career. By luck, the woman Jeff had been emailing was actually his assistant at his new job, and Jeff's new boss was his brother-in-law. Jeff and his new wife actually moved to her hometown so she could be close to her family, and so Jeff could go to work for his new brother-in-law. I have no idea if Jeff actually was cheating. He told the mutual friend who passed this story on to Eileen that they hadn't been having an affair. It didn't matter to his new wife though, because she and Jeff got together when Jeff was already married. She didn't have a lot of trust for Jeff. She didn't believe Jeff's denials when I sent the email about him having an affair. She filed for divorce, and Jeff's brother-in-law fired him. And since the construction was delayed, the new house wasn't finished when Jeff and his new wife divorced. They had to sell an unfinished home, and Jeff took a big financial hit. Finally, these weren't part of my larger revenge plan, but I am pretty petty, so I took the box of Jeff's stuff, mostly photographs, and threw them away. I told Eileen they must have been lost in the move. Signed both of Jeff's email addresses for a bunch of spam, newsletters, mailing lists, etc. Deleted his Netflix watch list. Posted, retweeted, and liked a bunch of inappropriate content on his Twitter account, and deleted all the accounts he was following. The ending. I never told Eileen what I did because I wanted her to have plausible deniability, and I didn't want to interfere with her recovery. She doesn't know about the boat lawsuit or the Netflix and Twitter stuff, but she did take satisfaction from his divorce and job loss. I probably would have let it all go if Jeff had just cheated because I had always really liked Jeff. I always thought he was nice, but I was obviously wrong about him. Nice people don't weaponize childhood abuse to mentally torture their wives. As far as I'm concerned, Jeff deserved everything I did to him. One day, I decided to go off-grid and install solar panels on my property. I'm an environmental engineer, and I've always been passionate about sustainable living. After years of saving and planning, I finally bought a small piece of land on the outskirts of town and built my dream home, a modest, energy-efficient house powered entirely by solar energy. Everything was perfect until my new neighbor moved in next door. From day one, she was nothing but trouble. She introduced herself as the neighborhood watch captain and immediately started prying into my business. Neighbor: "Hi there, I'm your new neighbor. I noticed you have quite an impressive solar setup. I'm the neighborhood watch captain, so I like to know what's going on around here." Me: "Oh, hello, yes, I generate all my electricity from solar. It's nice to meet you." Neighbor: "That's fascinating, you must have a lot of excess power. I was thinking, since we're neighbors now, maybe you could share some of that electricity with me, to be neighborly." I was taken aback by her boldness. I politely explained that I sized my system specifically for my needs and didn't have excess to share. Plus, it would be illegal to run power lines between properties without proper permits and inspections. Me: "I'm sorry, but I don't have excess power to share. My system is designed for my use only." Neighbor: "But you have all those panels, surely you're not using all that power. Come on, be a good neighbor. I'll even pay you a small fee for it." Me: "It doesn't work that way. I can't legally or safely share my power with you. If you're interested in solar, I'd be happy to recommend some installers." She didn't take my refusal well. Over the next few weeks, she kept pestering me about it, trying to guilt me into sharing my electricity. I stood my ground, but she became increasingly aggressive and entitled. One day, I came home from work to find her in my yard, examining my electrical box. Me: "Excuse me, what are you doing on my property?" Neighbor: "Oh, I was just looking at your setup. I still think it's selfish of you not to share. You have so much." Me: "Please leave my property now, this is trespassing." Neighbor: "Don't be so dramatic. We're neighbors, I'm just trying to understand how this all works." I had to physically escort her off my property. After that incident, I installed security cameras around my house and solar array. I had a feeling she wouldn't give up so easily, and I was right. A few days later, I was working from home when I heard a noise on my roof. I checked my security camera feed and was shocked to see my neighbor on my roof tampering with my solar panels. I rushed outside, my heart pounding. Me: "What the hell do you think you're doing? Get off my roof right now." Neighbor: "Mind your own business. If you won't share, I'll just take what I need." Me: "Are you insane? You're destroying my property. Get down before you hurt yourself." I was yelling at her, furious at her audacity. She looked startled by my anger and tried to scramble down. That's when it happened. She lost her footing and slipped. I watched in horror as she tumbled off the roof. Fortunately, she hit a few things on the way down that broke her fall: my gutter, a small awning, and finally my hedge, but she still hit the ground hard. I immediately called for an ambulance and the police. While we waited, I checked on her. She was conscious but in obvious pain. Neighbor: "You pushed me, you tried to kill me." Me: "What? I didn't even touch you. You fell because you were trespassing and tampering with my property." The emergency services arrived quickly. The police took statements from both of us, and the paramedics took her to the hospital. I later found out she had suffered multiple fractures and would be in a wheelchair for several months. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. A few weeks later, I received a letter from her lawyer. She was suing me for $5 million, claiming I had pushed her off the roof and caused her injuries. I was stunned. Not only had she trespassed and damaged my property, but now she was trying to blame me for her own stupidity. I immediately contacted my own lawyer and showed him the security camera footage of the incident. He was confident we could not only defeat her lawsuit, but also counter-sue for the damage she caused. The legal battle dragged on for months. Her lawyer tried to paint me as a selfish, aggressive neighbor who had lured her onto the roof and then pushed her off. My lawyer presented the security footage, which clearly showed her trespassing and tampering with my solar panels, as well as her accidental fall. During the deposition, I finally got to confront her directly. Me: "Why did you think it was okay to trespass on my property and damage my solar panels?" Neighbor: "You were hoarding all that electricity. It's not fair. I have a right to it too." My lawyer: "Ma'am, do you understand that what you did was illegal?" Neighbor: "He should have shared. I was just taking what he owed the community." Her lawyer looked increasingly uncomfortable as she dug herself deeper. It was clear to everyone in the room that she had no concept of property rights or personal responsibility. As the case progressed, more of her history came to light. It turned out she had a record of similar entitled behavior in her previous neighborhood. She had been involved in multiple disputes with neighbors over property lines, noise complaints, and even attempted theft of Wi-Fi signals. The judge was not impressed with her claims. In the end, her lawsuit was thrown out, and my countersuit was successful. The court awarded me $250,000 for the damage to my solar panels, the cost of increased security measures, and emotional distress. But the story doesn't end there. During the trial, her erratic behavior caught the attention of social services. They launched an investigation and found that she had been scamming her elderly parents out of their retirement funds to finance her lifestyle. This led to additional charges against her. In the end, she not only had to pay me the settlement, but also faced criminal charges for elder abuse and fraud. She was sentenced to house arrest after her recovery and mandatory psychological evaluation and treatment. As for me, I used part of the settlement money to upgrade my security system and donate to a local renewable energy education program. The rest I set aside for future home improvements. The whole ordeal was a nightmare, but it taught me the importance of standing up for myself and my rights. It also showed me the value of documentation and security measures. My neighbor learned some hard lessons too, though I doubt she'll ever fully understand the concept of respecting others' property. Life has finally returned to normal. I still live in my solar-powered home, enjoying the peace and quiet. And my ex-neighbor, last I heard, she was complaining about the lack of sunlight in her new apartment, on the ground floor of a retirement community where she's under strict supervision. Karma, it seems, can be just as powerful as solar energy. We've all experienced the embarrassing parent. Many have had one, and some have experienced it firsthand. The public display of affection was the worst for me. My mom used to take great pride in telling me she loved me in front of my friends. She'd tell them stories that were funny, but as a teen, they made you want the earth to open up and swallow you whole. Fast forward to me being 38. I get along well with my mom. She's unironically my best friend. Every conversation ends with a mutual "I love you." I am working in a supermarket, moving items around in a section. Mom had been away for a week, and she happened to stop in at the place I'm working. She spotted my car, decided she wanted to say hello, and came to find me. I'm up on a step, face first in the shelves. She approaches and gives a quiet, "Excuse me." I'm always getting asked for help, so I put on my customer service face, step down, and turn around. I give her a hug and a kiss, we have a short chat, and I go back to work. When she reaches the end of the aisle, I'm on the step, head above the shelves. I yell out, "Hey!" Mom stops and turns. "I love you," I sing-song so loud. People 2 aisles overheard it. Mom went red in the face. She looked at the ground and muttered just loudly enough for me to hear, "I love you too." I still laugh at it. This took place a couple of months ago. I went to Walmart with my friends. Our Walmart was only a 2-minute walk. After about 30 minutes, I parted from my friends and went looking around. Keep in mind, I was also listening to music. I ended up stumbling into the car part section, then went to pass through the toy section. I saw that my Walmart started selling bendy plushies, and I wanted to get one for myself. I'm kind of a bendy fan. I ended up dropping some plushies on the ground, so I had to pick them up. I went back and stood there for a while, looking at the bendy plushies and figures they sold, listening to Ailstorm at the time, when, at that moment, it happened. It happened. I got an almost sharp poke in the shoulder, and there's the behemoth. Let's call her Karen. Stereotypical Karen, with the hair, outfit, purse, the whole deal. She also had a harsh Bayou Texan slang. I only stared for a couple of seconds, saw her irritated face, then went back to looking at the bendy stuff. Karen then proceeds to yank my earbuds out of my ears, and they crash to the ground. I look up, and this is the conversation. Me: "What is your problem, lady?" Karen: "Excuse me, is that the language you use with people? And why are you listening to music and not helping your customers?" Me: "What do you mean?" Karen: "Why are you not doing your job? I need your manager, now." Me: Ma'am, I don't work here. Karen. Yes you do. Don't you dare lie to me, she says, pointing her finger at me. Either you help me because my kids and husband are waiting for me, or I get your manager and have you fired. Me. For the second time, I don't work here. At this point, I said to myself, forget this, I'm out of here. I unplugged my earbuds, turned around, and walked away to find my friends. Karen started to yell at me, and a few seconds later, I felt a firm grip on my arm and a violent pull. This woman was now dragging me away. Me, ow, let me go. Karen. I'm taking you to your manager. After we went out of the toy aisle, I threw myself forward and managed to make this woman lose balance and almost fall down. But she didn't. She then turned around and proceeded to scream at me. Karen. How dare you? You nearly made me fall and that's assault. Me. Don't you ever touch me, you selfish weirdo, leave me alone. She lunged at me to grab me again when all of a sudden, one of the employees jumped in. Employee, stop, what is going on here? Karen. This employee refused to help me and assaulted me. I want him fired, now. Employee, looks at me, then at Karen. Ma'am, he doesn't work here. He was right. I was legit wearing a Metallica shirt, dark blue jeans and boots. Good indicators that I didn't work there. Karen. Yes he does, I saw him stalking the toys. Me. Are you blind or just plain stupid? Karen. And now he is being rude, fire him now. Employee, into radio. I need a manager and police here. Karen heard what he said and started to smirk at me. The manager showed up first. He took me aside and told Karen to stand with the employee. He started to question me. Manager, what happened? Me. This woman came up to me and snatched my earbuds out of my ears. Then she started to demand that I help her because she thought I worked here. When I walked away, she grabbed my arm and jerked it. I lift my short sleeve to show the marks where her nails dug into the skin. I jerked away and she lost her balance and almost fell. Manager, I see, I'll look into this. One county deputy stepped in after about 5 minutes and started taking statements. I gave him mine after Karen. He told me that she accused me of being hostile and that I had assaulted her, and she wanted to file charges on the evil employee. I showed the officer my arm, and the officer looked at me with more of a crossed eye than a deer in headlights. Deputy. That is interesting. I'll look at the CCTV and we'll conclude the situation. The manager and officer went off to look at the camera video, and came back after 10 minutes. Karen looked nervous now. Karen, rushing, are we almost done here? I need to go. Deputy, says in a condescending tone, where are you going? You're under arrest for assault. Karen started to flip out, yelling and screaming. She started to resist the officer, and he called for backup. It took 2 officers and the manager to calm her enough to put handcuffs on her wrists. Afterward, one deputy came to me. Deputy, do you want to press charges? I told him yes, serves her right. I ended up going on the county booking site. My county allows you to see county jail inmates, and I saw her mugshot and charges. She got assault on a peace officer and resisting arrest. Maybe this would have never happened if she pulled her head out of the sand. I kept this quiet for a bit until my friend introduced me to this website. Hope y'all like it. If you think about it cynically, one of the functions of the police is to provide a sort of society-wide revenge service. Unfortunately for this sub, it's usually kind of boring. When cops do take exceptional revenge, it's usually unfortunate and icky, like a rough treatment in the no-camera areas of the station or giving someone the silent treatment during transport. Fortunately, most police revenge isn't dramatic, it's procedural. You misbehave, we do the paperwork, and eventually, some consequences happen or not. Sometimes, however, you get a chance to take a bit of vengeance, that is, I hope, the very definition of professional. For a time, I was a small-town Canadian cop, working in a small town in a Canadian province. Several years before I came to work in the town, there was an event which entered town legend, and made national news. The funny little throwaway story they go to just before the end of the broadcast. Some kids committed an act of spectacular and iconic vandalism, costing the town quite a bit of money. They were all caught, tried, and sentenced to probation terms with restitution. I would love to provide details, but anything more would be immediately identifiable. All but one of the kids paid off quickly, served their probation without major incident, and moved on with their lives. These were juvenile sentences, and would, in the ordinary course of things, be purged from their records about 2 years after the completion of probation. Unfortunately for one of them, whom we will refer to as Lackwit hereafter, this was only the beginning of a pattern of failure and incompetence that would mark his life from then on. Lackwit came from the kind of low-down redneck family that can't meet the standards of a transient's trailer park. They lived in decrepit trailers on a semi-serviced rural property that someone lent them out of pity. I wish I could tell you the moronic and laughable names these cretinous parents inflicted on their kids. Think Jesse James for the boys and Jezebel for the girls, and you're aiming too classy. I suppose his unfortunate nature wasn't his fault, but Lackwit seemed so dedicated to his banal evil and low-grade crime that any sympathy I might have had just kind of melted away. When I first arrived at the post, I was given my share of the list of the area's repeat offenders, who it would be my job to keep tabs on. Basically, the boss divided up all of the guys/gals on probation or other court supervision, and every constable was responsible for any new charges involving one of their guys. Lackwit was to be my problem for the next 3 to 5 years. I spoke with his probation officer and was told that Lackwit hadn't paid 1 dime of his restitution, and in fact had been charged with breaching his probation by not doing so. He had also not been doing required community service, had missed probation appointments, and was generally not a great subject. She recommended additional breach charges, which we duly laid. The matter wended its leisurely way through the justice system, and eventually Lackwit appeared before a judge. Out in these rural circuits, the judges come by once a day a month, and it's frequently the same judge seeing these redneck recidivists again and again. This judge turned out to be the same one who had sentenced Lackwit to probation for his initial vandalism and the subsequent breaches. Of course, on each of these occasions, Lackwit had begged the mercy of the court, promised to get his life together, and so on. Understand, we're now more than 4 years out from the initial vandalism event. This might have worked on this occasion too, but the restitution became a sticking point. This town was small, and they needed the money from the restitution to repair some of the damage. We had a victim statement from the town about the things they couldn't afford to do without raising rates on their taxpayers. We had evidence of the reasons Lackwit wasn't holding down jobs: attendance, unreliability, substance use at work, and we had evidence of the money he had made but not bothered to pay to the town. The judge decided to throw the book at Lackwit this time. He put him on a conditional sentence order, CSO, although Lackwit's original charges were youth charges and would have been purged. His breach of probation occurred after his 18th birthday, so it is an adult charge and semi-permanent on his record. Nice work, chump. A digression on the Canadian justice system. We don't like to put people in prison. This is for a number of reasons. We're cheap and prison is expensive. Our jails are hideously overcrowded and ill-maintained, and it flat out doesn't work anyways. Trust me on this. If you aren't committing crimes against persons or involving serious offenses, you aren't likely to go to jail on a first offense unless you're doing damage, stealing into the millions. End digression. A CSO is like a super probation order. It's technically a jail sentence, but one you serve outside of a jail. The judge can order you to stay at a particular location, can give you a curfew or house arrest, and can impose practically any conditions he/she feels will assist you in successfully completing your term. The CSO also has some procedural differences from a probation order which will be important later. In this case, it had a pretty strict curfew among other things. Lackwit is terrible at complying with his order. We give him a few warnings about curfew breaches and notify his probation officer. Lackwit is formally cautioned. It comes to pass that Lackwit asks probation for permission to do a thing and is denied. Lackwit does the thing anyways, and becomes aware that we know about it. We stop by Lackwit's house to have a discussion, and Lackwit decides to go on the run. He rabbits, and we don't see him again for a while. A breach of the CSO is filed and approved by prosecution. At this point, Lackwit knows he's going to be jailed for at least a week or two, and being a virgin jail-wise, has no intention of being caught. Over the next few weeks, we are told by sources, you would call them informants, what Lackwit is up to. He has couch-surfed until he wore out his welcome with his few friends, and is now living in an abandoned car behind a friend's house. Friend's dad hates him, so Lackwit has to sneak in and out and spends his days wandering disconsolately around town trying to find people to hang out with, or who might lend him money. I begin to see Lackwit around town but pretend not to. I go by his house from time to time, but he is never home. Sources say his parents want him to turn himself in to get us off their backs, but he is convinced he's going to go to jail and get severely punished. Not likely, but hey, he hasn't let us explain that, and they will not let him stay there. I visit his friends and make a point of being very obvious when I visit the friend's house with the derelict car. I never find Lackwit, but am told that he spends several cold nights in the bush after our visits. At this time, I have a rookie with me. One day we come across Lackwit and he bolts. Rookie is gung-ho and she starts to chase. I catch up and after a token effort tell her to stop. She asks why we could have caught him. Lackwit is lanky but has the grace and coordination of a professional esports player, even with 20 kilograms of gear strapped on. Catching him isn't going to be a problem. Me. Look, I don't want to actually catch Lackwit. Rookie. Why not? We've been out to look for him maybe a half-dozen times this month. Me. The thing is, Lackwit is punishing himself far more than the court will, and he's providing a great lesson to his friends about the consequences of this kind of life. Now, the thing about a probation order is that it has a fixed duration. From the date you begin to serve it, it runs for X months. If you're out of the country, in jail, or on the run, the order still runs out. A CSO doesn't work this way. If a CSO breach is filed, the CSO stops counting down. I tell this to my wide-eyed rookie, then add, me. If I'd picked him up 3 months ago, he'd have done a week or so in cells with a warm bed and 3 meals a day, then been out again with a firm slap on the wrist. This way, he can live like a hunted animal until he gets tired of it, then serve the same amount of time as he would have if he'd just turned himself in. He ended up turning himself in a couple of months later when the fall nights got a bit too cold for him. For the next few years, I would use the story, now well known locally, of Lackwit's escapades to frighten young juvenile offenders and to convince them to comply with probation. Thank you for joining us. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe for more captivating stories. Share your own experiences and opinions in the comments below, and let's keep the conversation going. Until next time, stay tuned for more epic tales.